Johnson.
Well, I thank the chair for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 21, the Strategic Production Response Act. Instead of unleashing America's vast domestic energy resources, President Biden has hobbled our nation's energy production, resulting in fuel shortages and rising energy costs for all American families. He went so far as begging foreign dictators for oil instead of uplifting America's economy. It's worth noting that just a few short years ago, America was energy independent. House Republicans have made it clear that we are going to hold the Biden administration accountable for its actions. As we sit here today, President Biden has drained around 40% of our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The reserve was established to be used for national emergencies, not for cheap political points or Band-Aids for failed policies. The Strategic Production Response Act would require the Biden administration to replenish and maintain the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and the legislation would require the Secretary of Energy to come up with a plan to replenish the reserve if oil is taken for non-emergency reasons. The President has ample solutions in front of him to fix America's energy crisis. In fact, Americans have been offering up long-term energy solutions to the Biden administration, but they refuse to listen. Instead, they've given in to the demands of left-wing special interest and radical environmental groups and have left the American people stranded. In America, we do our part in making sure that the energy we produce is done in a more cleaner, more safer way than any other country on earth. Unleashing American energy is the solution to our nation's energy crisis. My message to President Biden is simple. The days of taking shortcuts to make up major policy failures are over. H.R. 21 is an important step in holding the administration accountable for their actions, and I'm proud to support this legislation, and I yield back.
The gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield now 4 minutes to the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee who's worked so hard on clean energy issues, Mr. Grijalva.
Thank you very much, and thank you for yielding, Congressman. And Mr. Chair, I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 21 and urge all my colleagues to oppose this big giveaway to big oil. The bill before us today is yet another effort to open our public lands and waters to major new oil and gas extraction. This is despite the fact that oil companies already control huge amounts of our public lands and waters, and most of those they don't even use. Right now, oil and gas companies have about 9,000 approved but unused permits across 26 million acres of public land. Right now, offshore, they have 2,000 active leases covering 12 million acres, 3/4 of which aren't being used. The bill asks us to give them even more land, an area 3 times the size of California, or more than 300 million additional acres. Big oil has more public land than they can use. They could expand production today if they really wanted to. Instead, they lobby Congress to even open up more lands to extraction, to lower environmental standards, and to give them more taxpayer-funded subsidies. And in the process, lock out and public land and public assets from other essential uses that would contribute to the American people and contribute to the mitigation and remediation and the climate action that is required around the issue of climate and the climate crisis. To add insult to injury, this bill would actually make it harder to help everyday Americans. It would prevent the president's ability to keep down gas prices. Last year, President Biden took decisive action, allowing releases from the reserve to lower the prices at the pump. Under this bill, if the president needed to act again to keep prices low, he'd first have to pay off big oil by opening up our public lands. This bill does not protect American people, and it certainly doesn't protect our climate or environment. I urge my colleagues to vote no and yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman. I am pleased to yield 1 minute to Leader on the Energy and Commerce Committee, gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank my chairwoman. Mr. Speaker, I support H.R. 2021. Michiganders are facing hardships due to President Biden and Secretary Granholm's war on American energy. My constituents are struggling to afford to fill up their tanks and heat their homes. Instead of abandoning his failed progressive policies and unleashing domestic energy production to lower costs for hardworking Americans, the Biden administration decided to use America's Strategic Petroleum Reserve as a political band-aid. President Biden has sold off over 250 million barrels of oil, draining our SPR to its lowest level since 1983. American Strategic Petroleum Reserve is to be used in cases of national emergency, not political emergencies. Energy security is national security. H.R. 21 is a common-sense measure to ensure that our SPR remains ready for when we face global supply disruptions that threaten our economy and prevents politically motivated withdrawals.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Let's pass it. I yield back.
I reserve.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 3 minutes now to the gentlewoman from Florida, the former chair of the Select Committee on Climate, who's done so much on clean energy issues.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 21. The Republican bill would cause higher gas prices. It would hamstring the ability of the president to respond to a crisis. It also would open up areas to drilling and pollution that should be off limits, and it would exacerbate climate pollution and the costly related impacts ripping across America. You know, after Putin invaded Ukraine and American consumers were grappling with higher gas prices, President Biden was right to release oil from the Strategic Reserve to cushion the economic blow to American families. It was a common sense strategy that helped lower gas prices for Americans. But now Republicans want to tie the hands of the president to act when necessary. But there are too many contingencies in the world, war, supply chain issues, natural disasters, to irrationally tie the hands of the commander-in-chief to use the Strategic Reserve when needed. This bill also opens up areas to drilling and pollution that should be off limits, like the coast of Florida. Could wreck our economy, our beautiful coastal waters and beaches, and areas that the Department of Defense needs for military training. Plus, it's completely unnecessary. The oil and gas industry already controls large portions of public lands and waters. They aren't using it. They're sitting on approximately 9,000 approved but unused permits for drilling. And then finally, this is dangerous and costly and will exacerbate the climate crisis. The top scientists say that we have a rapidly closing window to reduce climate pollution and avoid the worst impacts, but Republicans have abdicated their responsibility to keep these costs in check for everyday Americans. True energy security and independence will come through clean energy, efficiency, and innovation. 20% of the electricity net generation in the U.S. right now comes from renewable sources. With the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are on track now to lower costs, to create good-paying jobs, and to build safer, healthier, more resilient communities across the country. This bill is an outrageous handout to polluters that will cost families, and it will weaken energy security for America. In this Republican House, I guess big oil and the wealthy, powerful special interests win, while everyday Americans will pay more. I yield back my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our energy security is under attack. The administration has drained our Strategic Petroleum Reserve, selling off 40% of the reserve in just the last 2 years. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is now at its lowest level in 40 years, posing a threat to our country in the event of a real emergency. Yet this administration has failed to implement even a simple plan to replace the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That is what this bill does. The Strategic Production Response Act, Republicans are stepping up to the plate to ensure any non-emergency release is accompanied by a plan to increase the percentage of federal lands and water leased for oil and gas exploration. This is responsible. This is common sense. This bill is a critical step in unleashing our domestic energy production, increasing our emergency supply, and delivering on our promise to protect our nation's energy security.
Gentlelady's time
and I
has
yield back.
expired.
I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I now yield 2 minutes to a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, gentleman from California, Mr. Cardenas.
The gentleman is recognized. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition of H.R. 21. If the beautiful, wonderful Marvin Gaye were with us today, he would say, "What's going on?" Much more beautifully than I could say it. But this is what's going on. This legislation is bad policy that will severely increase the price of gas at the pump, destroy our environment, and pollute and poison the air that our children and grandchildren deserve to breathe. It will only help the rich get richer. This bill could require the U.S. to open up over 300 million acres of federal lands for new oil and gas drilling. To put that into scale, that is 3 times the size of the state of California. Rather than curbing our independence on fossil fuels and making America more energy independent, my Republican colleagues are pushing legislation that will only increase our resilience on fossil fuels. This bill is incredibly foolish and does nothing to address the real problems. What are they really up to? What it is they want to put money into the pockets of big oil executives while taking it out of the pockets of everyday Americans. So I ask, what is this true intention on this legislation? Who does this help? Well, I just told you, it helps big oil and hurts everyday Americans. Because I know for damn sure it doesn't help the working families across our great country. I'd like to remind my colleagues and all of us that we were elected to come here to this body to represent all Americans, not just special interests. Your bill will only line the pockets of your fossil fuel friends while making gas more expensive for everyday Americans. This bill is shameful. It fails our children and grandchildren. It fails to protect the American people, and I yield back.
Members are reminded to direct their